and federal agencies, including recommendations and a symposium and some other products as well, going back to even before ChatGPT emerged on the scene. I certainly don't have to tell anyone who's on our panel or even any of our viewers that AI has the potential for being transformative to how federal administrative agencies do their work and operations. In fact, it already has had a tremendous effect, and it will continue to have. But of course, along with the opportunities that it presents, it also poses many challenges. And that's what this forum, these two panels, are going to talk about to continue our efforts, all of our efforts, to focus on these issues and to try to shed some light on them. So a special thank you to our panelists and our moderator, and to ACUS staff attorney, Kaja Novatsky, and to our intern, Mirage. Thank you, Suzgan. Thank you to all of you for your work making these panels come to life. And now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Carrie Colonisi, who is a good friend of ACUS, who focuses a lot of his practice on AI and administrative agencies, and who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, Carey School of Law. Carrie, thank you so much for being here, and the panel is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. Thank you for your leadership at ACUS, and my thanks as well to the tremendous staff that make up really the heart of ACUS and keep it alive, keep all of the work of the government and public members channeled in a positive direction and making such a difference in terms of recommendations to agencies to improve their administrative practices, plus convening opportunities for dialogue and additional learning like we have here today. And I'm just really very excited about today's discussion. Delighted to meet for the first time some of our panel members, to reconnect with others, and to participate in what I'm sure will be a very illuminating and lively discussion on leveraging generative AI for federal goals and the public interest. And as ACUS has announced, this panel is intended to assess how generative AI is reshaping public sector activities, with a focus here today on enhancing operational efficiency, driving innovation, and transforming service delivery. In addition, we're aiming to explore how AI technologies can be leveraged to meet federal objectives while protecting public interests and public values as well. To help us achieve that objective for today's dialogue, I'm delighted to introduce our panelists, and I'll introduce them in the order that they'll offer some opening remarks. Then we'll have some questions and discussion among the panel members. And my understanding is we can also then entertain questions from panel members, which I would encourage you, if you're interested, to post those in the webinar chat as we go along the way. And to the extent time permits, I will try to get to as many of those to put forward to our panel members as we possibly can. So to help us in our discussion today and leading things off, I wanted to just introduce the panel members. Komal Goyal is a CEO and managing partner of 6E Technologies, which is a global IT advisory and consulting firm in the Oracle Cloud Business Suite and government consulting, where she oversees technology solutions and customer engagement activities. She's also a member of the Forbes Technology Council. So welcome, Komal. Next, we'll hear from Martin Stanley, who is an AI and cybersecurity researcher at the National Institute for Standards and Technology's AI Innovations Laboratory, where he works on and promotes the adoption of the widely circulated and well-known NIST AI risk management framework. Prior to his service at NIST, he was the emerging technology branch chief at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So welcome, Martin. Nice to meet you and have you part of this discussion. And last but not least, in our opening comments will be Daryl West, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Technology Innovation within the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., where he is a co-editor-in-chief of Tech Tank. And prior to his joining Brookings, he was the John Hazen White Professor of Political Science and Public Policy and director of the Taubman Center for Public Policy at Brown University. Really excited to have you all here. Let me turn things over for some initial remarks. Komal, can you get us started, please?
Of course. Thank you so much, Carrie. And thank you, ACUS, for inviting me to this esteemed panel. First thing I want to know, did someone use AI to find me on, on the internet? Because that's the first step that must have been taken. But jokes aside, very pleased to be here. My background, I actually started as a programmer, believe it or not, several years ago, or I'm going to date myself, and have been a solution architect for our clients for a very long time. Now I do government consulting, I love to solve very large problems. We have federal clients that we sit down and discuss their challenges with, and my focus has been AI for the past year and a half, because I do also come from data analytics background. So here I am, looking forward to this discussion with this esteemed panel.
Nice to meet everybody. Carrie, thank you for the invite. Again, Martin Stanley, AI and cybersecurity researcher here at NIST. And of course, with the AI risk management framework, we have we've had lots of adoption, and my primary function here at NIST is going out and doing what we call AI RMF operationalization, which is helping various groups to leverage the AI RMF, whether it's in government or beyond, and through that engagement, understand better how well the framework's working for people, what additional resources, guidance, what updates we can make, potentially to the framework to make it easier to use. And for folks that aren't familiar with the framework, it's a voluntary, risk-based, rights-preserving, flexible, adaptable guidance, which allows the determination and measurement and decision-making around the benefits and the risks of using artificial intelligence within a particular context of use or within an organization or mission space. And I think that's probably one of the best places to start here, because I think this panel is about achieving outcomes, and what we're talking about within the framework is exactly that. It's how do we prepare an organization to achieve the promise and the benefits of AI while mitigating and managing risks potentially that could work against achieving those outcomes. So we're looking forward to the discussion today and all of the various activities that are ongoing in the government, because there's a lot of them. It's probably one of the most interesting technology innovation cycles I've ever seen, where there's usually, whether it's been cloud or mobile or internet or whichever one you can remember, there's always a period where everyone was like, no, we're not doing that. But that hasn't been the case here with artificial intelligence. I think there's been a move to adopt, from very early on, and maybe some of the more forward-looking folks are actually within the federal government. So it's really great to talk about it.
Well, great. I'd want to get into this in the use cases in a moment. Next, Daryl.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm Daryl West. I work at the Brookings Institution, and we focus on the policy, legal, and regulatory aspects of AI. And a lot of what we're doing now is just kind of analyzing what to expect in federal agencies from the new Trump administration. It's going to be a time of great change, I think, on a variety of different fronts, but also in the AI area in particular. Republicans already have talked about unleashing innovation across the federal government. So I think there already is a lot of use of AI across the federal agencies. I think that trend is going to accelerate. I mean, we're already seeing it used for fraud detection, administrative efficiency, automating service delivery, chatbots to answer customer questions, and in a variety of other ways. I think the one big change that I would anticipate in moving from the Biden to the Trump administration is, all of you know, Biden put out this very prominent AI executive order, directed federal agencies to use AI, but then also think about what are the problems that are being raised, what are the human guardrails that need to be put in place, how do we balance innovation on the one hand versus guardrails and public values on the other hand. And I think Trump is also going to be a big proponent of AI, but he's probably going to alter that balance between adoption on the one hand and guardrails on the other. I think there will be more emphasis on the innovation side. There's likely to be more encouragement to experiment with different types of applications and then kind of see what works and what doesn't work. So I think it's going to be an exciting time. Those of you who are on the call who work in the federal agencies, I think we'll have some opportunities to do some new things through AI in the new administration.
So why don't we start with some level setting for our discussion, particularly for those who are joining us who might not be fully familiar with what artificial intelligence is, and particularly the focus of today's discussion on generative AI. Also, by the way, maybe we should make a point to clarify the extent to which we're focusing on uses of AI by the federal government that are classified and defense related versus those that are not classified and perhaps more oriented toward domestic policy administration. I'm not going to expect anybody on the panel to disclose anything classified in our discussion, but there's a lot of uses certainly that are that fall under that umbrella. But can anybody start us off with just understanding what AI is? Maybe I can turn to Martin for this because I know NIST has worked on a definition of AI, and you even referenced how AI emerged, even in some of its earliest forms in the federal government. And one of the earliest forms was developed by the U.S. Postal Service by developing machine learning algorithms that could read handwriting on envelopes. Now that's what I think a lot of people might think of as a different kind of artificial intelligence than what we're focusing on with generative AI. Maybe you could help us, Martin, start us off, but I encourage the other panel members to share just as a ground setting discussion. What are we talking about when we're talking about AI and generative AI in particular?
Sure. So I have my key terminology here on the other screen, so I'm just going to read it, but so I don't misrepresent the definition, because there are many definitions, and I think this is one of the real challenges that folks have, in particular when it comes to various kinds of activities, because people want a consistent definition, and I think we're going to talk about like what the exact definition that NIST provides. There's others, and then really talk about what we're really considering. So AI systems are engineered or machine-based systems that generate outputs such as predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments and operating with varying levels of autonomy. And I think the key parts of this are generating predictions, recommendations, or decisions. And when we think about that in a more specific set of concerns, these are often recommendations or predictions or decision making that we typically associate with people. And so in handing over, either that is in an advisory role to a person or in place of a person, it creates a number of concerns, obviously, that people would immediately have with respect to that. But there's a number of different definitions. I like to think of AI systems as being differentiated from IT systems in the following way. AI systems are IT systems all up until they're not. And when they're not, our traditional, risk management that we have for technology and our traditional operation and support environments are insufficient to manage those potential outcomes that we're concerned with. And furthermore, the controls and measures are insufficient as well. And so hopefully we'll get into talking about that and some of the work that we're doing in order to augment those capabilities.
Daryl Comel, do you want to take a stab at this ground setting and also, generative AI in particular? Kamal, you mentioned that maybe we had used AI, someone had used AI to help put this panel together, or I will assure you that all of my questions and conversations are based upon, human intelligence for what it is. So take it or leave it. But happy to hear how you break this down, and maybe if you could help us just clarify the distinction between, say, a traditional AI and a generative AI that we're going to focus on here.
Sure. So I want to take, what Martin said. There's a good segue from there. Martin talked about IT systems versus AI systems. So let's start from there. Traditionally, IT systems, let's just talk about back office systems, financial systems, for example, or HR systems, which we have been using for, I would say now 40, 50 years, whether they were homegrown or they were COTS packages, it does not matter, but they had a specific task. For example, in HR MIS systems, you have the task of onboarding employees, offboarding employees, and then anything in between when, for the life of that employee within that organization. That includes their appraisals and whatnot. So this is an IT system, does not have intelligence of its own, does not know what to do outside of what it has been told. Now, if we slap a layer of AI, generative AI, then we all of a sudden can start talking about chatbots within the HCM system. I should be able to, as an employee, in that case, talk to my HCM system and say, just like we talk with Alexa, hey Alexa, how many PTOs do I have left on my this year? So now that AI that we are talking about now is not just doing the reporting and telling me back. I can then ask further questions. How many, if I don't take this leave this year, how many vacation days can I take forward, and so on and so forth. But in the back end, what AI is doing is collecting all the information that I am also providing by asking questions and becoming more intelligent. So if we, this is a clear difference between IT systems and, AI within. Now, AI cannot work without IT systems. Let's not kid ourselves. All that data is needed from the IT systems to make AI intelligent. But then AI goes a step further by utilizing the data that you are providing and becoming intelligent using that data, if I'm making sense.
That's great. Daryl, do you want to weigh in on this? Sometimes I like to say that, traditional AI was focused on a single function, like a surgeon's scalpel, whereas generative AI is multifunctional tools, which allows people to use it for different purposes, much like a Swiss Army knife. So a scalpel versus a Swiss Army knife. Anyway, Daryl, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this, or should we shift into what you started in your opening comments to talk about the different uses across the federal government. Do you want to venture into that
I mean, there
terrain
are
too?
different uses. I'll just add one point to the conversation we already have underway, which is I think one of the key aspects of generative AI is we have essentially used that to democratize the technology, meaning that in the old world of AI, you had to have at least a bit of a technical background in order to use and understand how the algorithms operated, how the information came in, how it got analyzed, and then how it issued decisions after the analysis. With generative AI, because these tools are prompt-driven and template-driven, they basically are accessible to everyone. And increasingly, AI is starting to have an audio interface. So you don't need to program anything. You need to say, this is what I'm interested in finding out. And then the algorithm will then generate that result for you. So I think what that means for federal employees is even if you are not a computer scientist, even if you're not an engineer, even if you don't have a technical background, there are tools that are going to be available to you that improve administrative efficiency. Kamal mentioned chatbots kind of answering common customer questions that are coming up. So I just think the types of applications are really going to accelerate. And everybody's always complained about the federal government is behind the times, it's inefficient, it doesn't really do things at the level of the private sector. I think we're at a point now where that actually can change and that the tools are available to improve efficiency, even if you don't have a technical background.
It is remarkable, you know, what the accessibility and the accuracy of the responses to some of these prompts. Now, it's not 100%, right? And we can talk, and I hope you will help us all understand a little bit more about what some of the downsides might be. You know, some of the hallucination that can occur. But you know, when OpenAI released ChatGPT version 3.0, it tested it on the uniform bar exam for lawyers, which it failed at and performed at only the 10% level. But in about a half a year later, when ChatGPT 4.0 was released, it passed the bar exam, and this is an exam with multiple choice questions and essay questions. It passed it at the 90th percentile. And since then, ChatGPT has been upgraded to an additional version. And of course, there's other tools as well. Claude and Google has its AI. AI is being built into a lot of search engines, a lot of legal products, all sorts of things in the private sector are starting to be augmented with these generative AI tools. Can we focus on what you see as some of the uses, or what you know of as some of the uses in the federal government? And I suppose if anybody's interested, by the way, you can go to ai.gov and find a database of about, last I checked, over 700 different use cases across the federal agencies. Most of those, though, I think are of the more traditional AI tools. That is, they've been designed to do things like perform specific functions. Reading handwriting, for example, in the mail is a traditional AI use. Let's do a round robin of uses that you're familiar with that we could put out on the table that can show the demonstrated possibilities of the generative AI tools that we're talking about today within the federal government. Anybody have any favorites or examples they want to toss out?
Yeah, the Veterans Affairs chatbots are, I would say that use case does stand out for claim processing. They have implemented chatbots for claim processing, and I think that's a chatbots in my mind, Carrie, are low-hanging fruit and are, you're not disrupting a whole system. By using chatbots, you are making your citizens' life easier, and you're using technology without compromising too much of back office work. So I really do like that use case that VA has done. And DOT also has implemented generative AI in at city government level, where they're using predictive maintenance and for public infrastructure like roads, for example, finding potholes, and then sending the information back to the municipality to get that fixed. So if there are cameras on the cars who are collecting the data, so this is basically IoT data collection and then sending it back to the municipalities, you know exactly where the pothole is and where it needs to be fixed. So that's another good use case.
Great. And just for those who aren't all in the lingo here, IoT, Internet of Things, the distributed, sensing and communication capacity over the internet for products like cars or thermostats or radios or television sets or things like that in our homes. Other use cases, Daryl, you mentioned some fraud detection. Are there specific examples there that you want to hold up, or any other successful uses that you see at the federal level?
I think one of the big use cases is going to be in the area of fraud detection, just because there's concern about how the money is being spent. And AI is very well equipped for this, in the sense it's good at analyzing data. And so there's a lot of stuff coming out of federal agencies just in terms of expenditure data, contract data, compliance data. Like, the federal government just collects so much information on so many different fronts. And what the AI for fraud detection can do is just look for outliers or unusual patterns. Like, you want to spot the Medicaid providers who seem to be charging at a much higher rate than other providers. And so AI is very good at kind of looking at a whole database and then seeing where the outliers take place and then referring them to a human. Like, the AI is not going to decide to prosecute somebody, but it can, out of all of the millions of cases out there, it can actually pinpoint what are the ones that look suspicious that warrant human oversight and human review. I'd say the other area for generative AI that could be useful in federal agencies is generative AI is really good at producing videos. Like, you don't need a video production company to generate videos anymore. Through any of the common generative AI forms, you can basically tell it via the prompt what it is you want to cover, the audience you're trying to reach, ask what is the best way to reach these people, and generative AI will produce short videos for you. And I think that's something that could be useful for a variety of different agencies, because we know in general society is moving away from text as a form of communication to audio and video. And so I think things that agencies should be thinking about is starting to convert more of their materials to audio form and video form. People are now used to YouTube videos as a way to learn different things. Agencies could put out short videos on how you file a claim or how you contest some decision that you might not like. And you don't need a big video production department to do that anymore. You can use generative AI to produce these short videos.
So these are a lot of compelling use cases for sure, and I think it demonstrates, because of these benefits, you're seeing lots of adoption, and I think from the perspective of folks that are trying to manage IT in the federal government, that's one of the reasons why there's this leaning towards promoting, as opposed to in the past when we've kind of try to hold off until we understood things better before we allowed people to use it, because you're just going to have people go out and start using this because of the compelling benefits. I think we didn't talk about what I personally find to be the most compelling use for generative AI in the federal government. But first, what I wanted to want to articulate here is, when we look at the AI inventory list, what we see is some use cases that are like, more general and broadly applicable across whether it's government or industry or whomever, just sort of use cases that are just compelling around the technology. And then we also see things which I call inherently governmental use cases. And these are things that are specific functions that the government performs that has subject matter expertise around that that others, out in the commercial industry may have less familiarity with. And so, the use of artificial intelligence in those, what I call inherently governmental use cases is going to be something that will probably really define how well we do. But to me, the number one use case for generative AI in the federal government is making sense of all the unstructured data that we have, whether they're in SharePoint repositories or things that have even been scanned in from, paper files that have been massed over decades and decades. Having that organizational history and knowledge, and being able to make better sense of it and better use of it and bring it to bear in decision-making situations, to me, is probably the most compelling use case. And obviously, it goes without saying that there's risks associated with doing that. And if folks are familiar with the generative AI profile for the NIST AI risk management framework, which we released back in July, we articulate the 12 risks which have been determined to be either unique to or exacerbated by the use of generative AI. And it offers guidance in how to manage and mitigate against those risks in application towards whether it's a federal use of generative AI or uses of generative AI more broadly.
Do you want to elaborate on those 12 for those who are with us, and maybe invite Daryl or Komal to comment on them, add to them?
So yes,
Illustrate that?
well, so the 12 risks are they're broad risks because this is a profile that's meant to be applied broadly for generative AI in a cross-sectoral way. The origination.
And when you say, by the way, sorry to interrupt you, these are risks that would be both applicable to public and private sector uses.
That's correct.
AI,
so the consideration was around generative AI and what are the concerns that are unique to or exacerbated by using generative AI. This was directed out of the executive order, but it originated much further back. We had a public working group which I co-chaired. The incident disclosure, there were kind of 4 function areas that we looked at. We took a bunch of feedback from the community, and if those are familiar with the way that NIST engages with the community, we had thousands of people participating in these working groups, providing us feedback to get to our final conclusions. And then ultimately, we had a number of rounds of public comments, and again to potentially understanding uses for AI. We had to look at every single one of those comments individually as people and to make sense of them. And of course, that's a practice here which we really value, is that engagement with the community. And through this public engagement, what we determined was what would be a benefit would be to articulate those risks. And again, this is a cross-sectoral view, so this could be any use of generative AI in any context. And for those of you that are familiar with AI application, the use cases it's very contextual. And so using AI, whether you're using, like, for example, image recognition to do some kind of function in an autonomous vehicle versus facial recognition versus doing some kind of imagery analysis to understand whether or not there's disease in some medical imaging. Those are 3 different contexts of use, 3 entirely different sets of risks and concerns. The AI risk management framework enables you to differentiate and to pull those out and prioritize, identify organizational risk tolerances, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This isn't an ARMF briefing, so I won't go too far into that. But the generative AI profile, which is derived from the AI risk management framework, focuses specifically on what those 12 risks are. And, we're talking about things that range from, whether it's, human AI configuration, in the sense that people are interacting with AI systems, to, IT security, privacy, harmful bias kind of risks, things like that, throughout. So in that construct, we then take those 12 risks and we derive suggested actions that organizations can take to mitigate those risks. And so that's the general structure of the profile.
Daryl or Kamal, do you want to add to some of the risks that you see? We've talked about some of the benefits, but what are some of the risks or downsides to keep in mind with generative AI?
I mean, I can jump in. First,
Yeah, please, Daryl.
Compliment Martin on the great work that NIST has done. Brookings did participate in some of the convenings that took place, and we found them very valuable. And I think the framework they came up with was actually very useful. It's very comprehensive. It identifies what are the things that could go wrong with AI and generative AI in particular. And I think it's a pretty complete and exhaustive list. I think the only question I would have is, now that we have a change in administration, like, is it going to change the framework in any way? Will the new administration have differing priorities? So, for example, one thing that I think everybody worries about is the risk of racial and/or gender bias in automated decision making. And it's something the Biden administration took seriously, but we don't know how the Trump people will view that. So those are the types of things we're starting to look at. Like, what does the change in administration mean for federal agencies? Are the things that used to be emphasized that may drop in importance?
Yeah, and obviously it's all speculative, and I wouldn't, I'm certainly not going to make any predictions around that. But there's guidance that came out of the administration, which is the executive order, and the OMB memo M2410, which is guidance for federal agencies related to safety and rights impacting uses of artificial intelligence. Those are things that the Biden administration had issued. And then the ARMF actually has its roots all the way back to 2018, and actually some executive orders that were issued out of the Trump administration. So I think the ARMF is sort of in a different category than some of the more specific things that have been done, in this administration. So, I guess we'll see what happens. But obviously, we think that the great adoption of the ARMF has been something that is a really huge accomplishment here at NIST.
Well, and keep in mind too that as Martin said, some of the executive orders of the Trump administration, which were retained by Biden, they actually focused on making sure that AI was trustworthy and consistent with public values in the United States. And there's some pieces of legislation too that have prompted the kind of work that we've seen, whether it's the OMB guidelines or NIST's risk management framework. Whether those will be revised is as I take it, your question, Daryl, and remains to be seen. Certainly, I think there is strong indications that Executive Order 14110 will be revoked or modified in the new administration. How so exactly remains to be seen, and what would replace it also remains to be seen. But that is, I guess, to be expected of a new administration. But let's focus here on, what other risks that might be there. I mean, for example, maybe Daryl, picking up off your example of creating videos, there's a good bit of controversy and concern that when generative AI tools produce new video content, that they may be drawing on and learning from copyrighted material of others. Do federal agencies have the same kind of intellectual property concerns to worry about if they are, using a generative AI tool to create videos, as you've indicated? Anybody want to comment on that, Daryl or others?
I would worry about the copyright aspect because that's an issue that is unresolved from a legal standpoint. I mean, there are the New York Times and some book publishers and other people have sued some of the generative AI tools for that very issue, alleging copyright violations. Those cases are still pending, so we don't know what the resolution of that is going to be. So that is definitely a serious issue. The other thing that has popped up is just misinformation and disinformation. Like you can generate videos, but you can also generate fake videos. And there are people outside of government that are generating fake videos designed to make government agencies look bad. So we've seen a lot of that as well. So there are definitely a risk in the generative AI area.
Kamal, any other risks do you that come to mind for you?
Well, I'm going to take a step back here. Generative AI, using generative AI for production of videos. I'm not gonna comment on that because, as Daryl said, we're not talking about copyrighted information here. But to me, the biggest risk is not putting data governance in place and trying to start AI projects within federal government. If you are not starting with data governance project, if you are an agency and you're starting to use generative AI using internal data, for example, wherever it is, SharePoint, you name it, an agency has so much data, they're collecting so much data, and they can use that data for generative AI purposes. But imagine a scenario where that data is not clean. And then because you're using generative AI, that data problem is going to continue to perpetuate. So having that framework should be an integral part of any AI project. That's a huge risk in my mind. And that stands out more than anything else.
So we're actually in the midst of a multi-year, multi-administration implementation of the federal data strategy, which goes back, I think, as well to the previous administration. And a lot of the activities that were laid out in the federal data strategy were meant to, in looking forward, enable the use of federal data appropriately. And that's really important. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but appropriately in the mission, and as well as making data sets available to the public, for training and that kind of thing. And you can go back and find all those actions going back. I think it's 2017 or 2018, something like that, that we've been working on implementing the federal data strategy. And I think to Kamal's point, having those inventories, understanding what are the appropriate uses that those data sets have been collected for, to make sure that's perpetuated, making sure that the access is restricted in the way that it's meant to be in accordance with whatever rule that information was protected under, and on and on and on. All of those things are laid out within the federal data strategy, and organization or federal agencies have actually been publishing where they are and with respect to those actions. So I think there's been this comprehensive federal enterprise view of this problem for quite some time, and the understanding that this data ultimately would be used in the ways that we're talking about today. It's just now we're here.
Yes, and additionally, I'll go back to I think it was Daryl who brought up using Gen AI to collect acquisition data. Now, if just think about a situation where there are two sources of a purchase order. Which one is correct? If you have not put the data governance framework in that agency as of yet, then GenAI has access to both sets of records. Which one is correct? I think going back to basics, yes, Gen AI is really advanced and we can do a lot of work with it. But if we don't put data governance framework in place, I think we would miss a huge mark.
You mentioned acquisition, and maybe that's a point that we could shift to, see if anybody has any comments on this. As the former chair of the administrative conference has reminded us in his work, Paul Verkyle, the federal government today, in terms of the number of employees in the civil service, is about the same as it was in the Kennedy administration. And so much of the work of what the federal agencies do is performed by contractors. And I think that must also bear out especially when it comes to advances in digital technologies like AI. Are there any particular concerns or guardrails, so to speak, or the like, or are there considerations that agency officials who might be joining on this webinar might need to take into account when they're dealing with the procurement of artificial intelligence or creating new systems that rely on generative AI, but being developed and provided by some outside contractor? Anybody have thoughts about that?
So I'm aware of numbers of agencies that are looking at putting together guidance for acquisition of AI systems. I believe GSA is involved in that. If I can't remember specifically, and I also know that there's considerations around that. I think what I would absolutely suggest to agencies as they're thinking about acquiring AI systems is really understand what's happening and what are the risks of using your data for training systems, or potentially having systems available for employees to use where information that is collected for a particular reason or is protected in some other way finds its way out of the agency in an inappropriate way. So I think generally speaking, that's probably the data protection concern is one of the bigger ones. But also, I think understanding the costs associated with training models and potentially having to retrain them if you're realizing risks and things like that. All of that I would hope are in these considerations, but we don't really work on that here.
Presumably the same kind of risk management considerations should go on into play when it's AI tools developed by private vendors is working for the federal government. We have a question that came in on the Q&A, and it allows me to encourage those who are watching today's webinar to type in any questions that you may have in the Q&A, and we could certainly turn to those. And I guess it really, the question here is, what kind of data governance controls can we implement as an agency to reduce bias, such as for disaster loans or farm loans? So we've been talking about the digital data strategy and the importance of quality data first of all and foremost, but there's also verification and validation efforts that are part of the risk management framework. So how does an agency go about implementing some of these controls that you see are important to address some of the concerns, whether it's from all the way from hallucinations and misinformation and disinformation to intellectual property concerns to the other to privacy and cybersecurity matters. There's a lot of potential for AI, but to manage these risks, what kind of data governance controls would be recommended, or do you see as most important?
So I think there's two aspects to that question. Within the generative AI profile, as I mentioned a couple of times, NIST AI 600-1, we have some specific suggested actions that can be taken to mitigate some of these data concerns, as well as within the NIST AI Risk Management Framework Playbook, which is available on the NIST AI Resource Center, AIRC. So there's a lot of I think general guidance out there for agencies to use in making those determinations, and how they can protect data. But of course, everything that already exists for cybersecurity and privacy and the like, all of that still applies. And I think that's really critical thing to say, and that a lot of the protection that you're going to be gaining for that data should already be there from those controls. One of the big challenges is a focus of one of our new programs here at NIST is being able to understand whether or not we're seeing particular harms and impacts from AI systems, and what the incidents, what the likelihood and magnitude of those harms are. So really measuring risks and impacts of AI systems. We have a new program called ARIA, which is assessing risks and impacts of artificial intelligence systems, and it is focused particularly at getting at this challenging problem. We have tools and capabilities available today to measure performance of AI systems, but what we don't really have is methodologies and tools to measure for harms and impacts, and also to measure the likelihood or the incidence or the magnitude. And so the intent is to create a methodology to do this, and then create a whole resource that can be used for people trying to make these risk-based decisions on what kind of risks do we see throughout the entire life cycle, and how likely are these risks to occur, because those are two key factors to go into making a risk-based determination. And these differ from performance, how accurate a system is, or how well it does a particular function. Because we don't necessarily look for those other kinds of things in a quantifiable way. So definitely encourage folks to check out that program, and hopefully that's helpful, as well as within our guidance about how to do additional data protections. And I think it's really important also to underscore that what we're seeing today from a vulnerability perspective, despite some of the things that we hear about, or that we hear people talking about, it's really the traditional cybersecurity vectors that are where most of the attacks and vulnerabilities are happening in our machine learning infrastructure today. These are things like default passwords, excessive privileges, lack of using zero trust, all of that kind of stuff that you would expect. Those are the most common vectors and vulnerabilities and incidents that we're seeing with AI systems, or these traditional kind of IT vectors.
So I can actually build on what Martin just said. I want to go back to Daryl's example of finding anomalies in the data sets. If we turn that to its head, if we can find anomalies using algorithms, we can also detect bias in the data, right? So if we can implement bias detection algorithms to ensure that bias is removed from picking the data set as much as possible, that's using technology to sort of back on its head in a way to ensure that we remove the bias from from, in this example, one of the audience, someone in the audience asked how to make sure that there's no bias in giving out loans for disaster recovery. So if we can find data anomalies, we can also write algorithms to reduce the bias.
Within the framework, we talk about it as harmful biases, because there's always going to be biases in data. It's really understanding, in particular, Kamal, the one that you were talking about the impact of, the impact of having biased data is a negative impact, and mitigating that. How do you do that? Is really what we're talking about.
Daryl?
And I'll just add a quick footnote to what Martin and Kamal have been saying, and I agree with their comments. I mean, particularly in the bias area, most of the AI problems actually are data problems. It's data problems either in terms of incomplete or unrepresentative data. And so agencies do have to be aware that as they start to incorporate algorithms in decision making, and we are seeing a lot of this in the finance area. One of the questions kind of asked about farm loans or other types of loans, and how do we find bias there? People in the private sector are using outside audits as a way to determine whether there are outliers or biases that seem to be built into that algorithm. So that's something agencies could consider. If anything, all of the data and then the analysis of the data actually makes it easier to detect unusual problems because they're going to pop out of the algorithm. So I think in some respects, agencies are going to have even better tools now to spot bias, to identify flaws in decision making, or kind of deal with other types of problems that come out of incomplete or unrepresentative data.
Are there practices like red teaming or other kinds of adversarial techniques that anybody wants to talk about with respect to generative AI in particular?
So this is specifically part of our ARIA program. So the ARIA approach involves three kinds of testing: your regular system performance testing, which we do. AI red teaming, which is different than cybersecurity red teaming. AI red teaming is actually taking a risk that we've already thought that we might experience and seeing if we can elicit it, out of the system, and then also doing broad field testing. And I think this really gets at, I think the point of having a very, very effective way, a very comprehensive way or method of including all the people throughout the AI lifecycle, in providing feedback as to how the system's working for them when there's problems. Throughout the AI risk management framework, some of the suggested actions are, ensuring that the user community has the ability to report harmful outcomes and what those impacts were, and that someone's looking at those and trying to understand, should that be happening? Probably not. What do we need to do, or should we be taking the system offline? That kind of thing. Are there redress capacities built into the system? Opt out, and the like. Those are the kinds of things that are needed to mitigate. But specifically to the question about red teaming, that gets at one aspect of measuring harms and impacts and likelihoods and that kind of thing with AI systems. But it's really only one of the tools that's needed for that. And I think one of the challenges that we've seen is people thinking, well, we'll just do AI red teaming and that will, give us a, clean, that'll give us a determination whether or not we should move forward or not. And I don't think that AI red teaming, while it's a very important tool, it's not going to serve that function. You have to have all those different views, and you have to do continuous assessment of these systems as they evolve, because that's one of the fundamental characteristics of AI systems.
So this is not a once and done activity that we look to see, did the vendor do some red teaming, validation, verification, auditing. You have to, as an agency, have that built in as an ongoing basis. So there's
We call
humans
it
are
within the
biased.
AI risk manager framework creating a risk aware culture as opposed to, or contrast, would contrast that to a compliance culture.
Right.
Yeah, and then it goes back to what Martin was saying, that data strategy, conducting audits and cleansing data. This is an ongoing thing. It has to become second nature of the agency to ensure that the data is clean and we don't have multiple sources. So this will become this is not something that will work as a project. It will be an ongoing process to ensure that your data is clean, and it is upon every agency to ensure that that's happening and within that agency.
And Kamal, to your point, we talked about this earlier, but AI risks and impacts are highly contextual. And by that, we're talking about the different ways in which an AI system may be used. And one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have is we may not always know how someone is using an AI system. If you've got like a general purpose system, like a generative AI system like ChatGPT, you have no idea how people are using it and what they're doing with the outputs and all that kind of thing. So you need to be asking questions. You need to be providing a mechanism for people to report back what they're using it for and how they're using it, so that you can validate that the evaluations that you prescribed are accounting for all these different kinds of risks and concerns. Because you may be red teaming for a certain set, or AI red teaming, as I said before, for a certain set of risks, and somebody may be based on a particular use of the system, and someone may use it for something else, and that's not on your list of risks, so you're not even testing for it, so you've got a blind spot.
Correct, very true.
And Martin, we've been talking about red teaming, but maybe for those who aren't familiar with that, can you just help us understand a little bit more about what that entails?
Sure. So I think we generally think of like red team. I come from the cybersecurity world, and we generally think of red teaming or penetration testing interchangeably, and that's really like sort of you've got a blind attacker who is doing some kind of permitted test to see if they can break into a system or cause it to be compromised, either from a confidentiality, integrity, or availability perspective. The traditional cybersecurity view of things. And you've got blue teams, and you've got all different ways that people think about this kind of attacker or defender sort of thing. With AI red teaming, the way that AI red teaming is different from cybersecurity red teaming is you're starting with a particular risk that you already know the system might be susceptible to. So that's coming from the people that are designing the system, or the people that are already using the system, or have some oversight of it. So it's not a completely blind test. You're not going in to see what you can do. You're starting with a certain set of knowledge about the system. And then what you're trying to do, and we just did an exercise. We did an exercise, maybe I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago at Canlis, where we had some red teamers come in and do some evaluation of some I think they were large language models, and those providers actually said, hey, we're interested in particular examples of these kinds of risks that you can induce from the system. And there was collaboration between the model providers and the red teamers throughout. So that differs drastically from what we typically see from typical red teaming, which is let's go off and see if we can compromise the system without really any kind of engagement with the people that are, unless it's that it's the social engineering or the the phishing part of it. That's the only kind of interaction usually that you have.
If we put it in the context of Kamal's earlier example about a chatbot at the VA that interacts with veterans and patients, an agency before deploying something like that would want to have a very rigorous effort to try to provoke that chatbot to say, let's say, racist things, or to instruct people to engage in self-harm or something like that. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, so what you're articulating is some of the risks associated with that particular,
Right.
technology in that particular context of use. But, I wouldn't know, and I don't have expertise in that area, but who would is people that deal with all of the, the veterans who, and so they're the ones that you should be asking, hey, we're looking at this particular use for this particular purpose, and we expect it to be used in this particular way. What are the kinds of risks we should be concerned with? And then to evaluate the system accordingly, to see if those risks are present or not. And, how do we continue to do that in a way? And what do we do when we see those risks? Like what is our organizational threshold? And this, we don't tell people, these harms are okay and these are not. Like we tell people, you should make an organizational or some kind of community determination around that. We may develop methods that people can go through to come to an agreement on what that community standard would be, but we don't tell people what that might be. But for sure, all of these use cases are loaded with opportunity, and we just have to make sure that we're not blind to what potential negative outcomes that there could be, because there's people involved.
Right. And certainly, yes, I didn't mean to suggest those as like exhaustive, but just to try to illustrate concretely
but those
for people
are
on the
compelling,
webinar,
right? Those are things
some of
that
the
concern you.
some of the things that might be involved, but just some of the things that that an agency might want to be aware of. A chatbot sounds like a great tool, but then if it goes awry, and of course, again, keeping track of it, and making sure that it hasn't spun out of control or picked up on something that the red teamers even initially didn't pick up on, but it's an ongoing process. I mean, I just wanted, to try to enter that in, see if that resonates with the panel members as the kind of thing that we're talking about, to bring it to a more concrete level.
Yeah, this is why training data models are so critical when you are creating AI or starting the use of AI. And then I will go back to data governance right here. That's my favorite topic, Martin. We can't emphasize enough on having clean data to start with. And your training models will follow that. If they're following the same process, you're at least in the beginning making sure that the bias is removed, the risks are at least you're aware of the risks, and then of course continually conducting the audits, as you just said, Carrie. Let's continue to make sure that the chatbot is not going awry. But that again falls back into our data governance framework.
Just following up, an attendee Kamal asked if you have thoughts about what makes for clean data, that a term you were using, and if you want to elaborate on that.
Oh, that's a that's a huge question. How do we say this is clean data? The data. So the way I look at the framework, and Martin, please, I'm not an expert in data governance side of the house, but please jump in and chime in if you may. So the way I look at it is taking the inventory of data first, and then finalizing what is the source. If you have data coming from two different sources, what source is the source? Then creating custodians of the data. For example, the purchasing data should not have custodians that are not buyers, financial people who are on the payment side, or I'm talking really granular level data here, but that's where you have to start. You cannot make custodian of a data set that does not understand that data set. So making sure that the source is clean, There's only single source of truth, single source of truth. You cannot have multiple sources of the same data set. You have to finalize on one. So there are multiple ways to skin this cat, but this is a very, I would say, general way of looking at how we say the data is clean. When we look at, say, for example, there is a big SharePoint repository with policies that the agency follows, for example. Let's just take that as an example. How are you ensuring that multiple sources are not saying different things? Where is the source? So
Where's
going
the ground
back to the
truth,
source
right?
becomes very important. So cleansing is a big deal before starting any AI project, in my opinion.
Making sure you don't have duplicate entries, multiple of the same thing, making sure that your representation of a particular thing is represented by the same data elements, right? So you don't have a whole bunch of different ones. I always go back to when we were doing just IT inventories, trying to do automated IT inventories, and we would try and identify, for example, how many Microsoft Windows systems that we had of different, vintages. And, you'd think, well, maybe there's 12, but there was really like 12,000 because for some reason the system had identified like all the different patch releases and everything else. So, it was like so impossible for us to make sense of that data, based on, the way that it had been recorded. And so I think to Kamal's point, it's, data cleaning would be to go in there and to make sure that you could, if possible, adjust the data to be representative of what you were, trying to do. And so these are the kinds of challenges that happen on these really, really large scales, which can introduce all kinds of problematic outcomes if you're not careful. And if you have, for example, a data set with double or multiple entries for the same thing, right, over and over and over again, that can create bias in your model because it's learned the same thing from dozens of the same same representation of a particular data element. So those are the kinds of things that I think, Kamal, you're talking about, and kind of on and on and on. And this is one of the other challenges is bringing in all these data scientists into organizations where data scientists haven't traditionally operated.
Yes.
Government,
And
you
yeah,
have these culture problems where they're used to having access to data, and they come into an organization, they're like, no, we don't do that here.
yeah.
It's like,
And
go through it.
duplication can be, think about a situation where you have multiple records of same data set, and your algorithm is attaching weight on the number of records of the same type. Now all of a sudden you have created a bias because your data is not clean, right? If each record has its own weight, then you are calculating that weight for that type of data, although it is duplicate, but it will count it 4 times and give more weight to that type of data. So having those things in mind when you are doing your data cleansing is very, very important. Deduplication is very important. Daryl, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Carrie, if I could just add
yeah.
one more point to what Martin and Kamal had to say, and I agree with all the points they made. But they're basically talking about numeric data, which have all these complications of duplicate sets and multiple sources of information, et cetera, et cetera. But increasingly, it's not just numeric data that is going into algorithms. Like there is printed text, there are PDFs, there are images, like there are all sorts of non-quantitative information that is going into algorithms and then producing some result. And when you have unstructured data, I think the data cleaning problem becomes even more intense. With structured data, at least you have some hope of knowing where things should be. With unstructured data, you often don't even know that. So I think the challenges grow even stronger there.
And if anybody on the webinar wants a concrete example, this is interesting to have this conversation because just this morning my wife showed me an appeal that she received in the mail from my alma mater for seeking a contribution, and it had her name and address on it, and it had an old email address of my son. We have no idea how in the world all of that got melded together to get put in the mail. But these are some of the realities, right? If you don't have the proper data controls. Let me turn to one of the other questions in the from the webinar audience and ask, we're talking about how to manage to AI tools to get the most out of them, but also to minimize the risks associated with them. And this questioner asks, to what extent do you think there will be centralization of AI development or review in the federal government? And if you do see centralization, where will this be coming from? The Commerce Department, OIRA, let's say, in the White House, GSA, or will there be leading departments or agencies, or is Congress going to become a major player in how AI governance proceeds in the future? Anybody want to respond to the centralization or to letting 1,000 flowers and 1,000 gardeners, I guess, bloom model?
So we're,
I
we're
think
already seeing, obviously AI providers through FedRAMP, and I think whether we have sort of general purpose systems that are broadly available, it's going to still be incumbent upon the agencies, as we've been talking about these various concerns related to data, the way that the data is being used, the context of use, all the context specific risks. I think the biggest challenge is going to be making the information available to agencies that are trying to use those general purpose systems that they're going to need in order to manage risks. So, for example, if you're trying to determine whether or not there's harmful biases, in these, inherent in the use of a particular system, you're going to need the provider to give you the information, out of the model, or not out of the model, but out of the out of the engagements with the system from the users and all that kind of stuff to really understand how well it's working for you in your environment. And so I think thinking about that, as people are trying to sell services to federal agencies, hopefully companies will be thinking about what is needed in order to provide that level of assurance to the public who's going to be using these systems, right? So we want to make sure that we're maintaining integrity throughout the entire AI life cycle, not only in us providing the service from a mission perspective, but throughout the ecosystem where we're acquiring the system from vendors and the like. So I think there's a lot of partnership that's going to have to happen there.
And I think centralization might be a challenge in the AI area, just because, as Martin has pointed out today, context really matters in AI, and different agencies have very different contexts. There may be different risk tolerance depending on the way the AI is being used and the scope of the application. So I think it's going to be hard just to kind of set up one agency as the place where all the AI is developed and reviewed and audited, just because the agency-specific knowledge is going to be quite relevant for how the AI is developed and how it's used.
And it assumes that we even know that an AI is being used, because we're going to be acquiring services where AI will be embedded in it, and we may not even know there's an AI doing something.
Yeah, point in case, iPhone now has AI built in, and we won't be able to avoid it. Yeah, true.
And Yeah, I make very much the same argument. If anybody's interested, I'll give a shameless plug for a paper of mine called "Regulating Machine Learning: The Challenge of Heterogeneity," which echoes what Daryl is saying about context really matter. Let me say we've got just a few more minutes. We've got a couple more questions we can get to from the audience. So if there's another question that anybody wants to put in, please feel free, but this may be the last call. But a key question that came in, I think, is we've been talking about risks when they're kind of identifiable or anticipated risks, where they are what we might call the known unknowns. But what about the unknown unknowns? Or the questioner asks, the risks we cannot identify or emergent risks in complex systems. What tools do we have to handle the emergent risks? And I guess I don't know if this is one tool. Martin, you were already talking about the avenues for user feedback. Certainly would be, I would gather, one of those tools. But are there other tools that you would recommend as agencies go forward and use generative AI tools, whether they're built into their iPhones or or elsewhere, that they want to make sure to be on top of?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple aspects to that. It's not only feedback on how the system is working for a user, but there's also the feedback on how the user is employing the system, because that really drives what some of these risks are. So there's things that we just have no idea that might happen, but one of the key characteristics of the ARMF is that it's, if you see the picture, it's circle, with the functions. And that's purposeful because as you get information from how the system is operating, in particular, how people are using it, are you realizing risks? You have to go back and make other kinds of determinations, as we've been discussing. So, whether that's happening in an automated way, hopefully in the future, there'll be a lot more of that based on what we've been working on here with the ARIA program, which is an R&D program. We're not going to be publishing a paper on, or we're not going to be publishing a methodology on here's how you manage risks and impacts to your AI system and don't have to think about it anymore. It's more of the the other view of it is thinking about having a risk-aware culture where you're asking questions and you're trying to understand how well things are going, and you're engaged with the users and really all of the folks that are involved in the entire AI life cycle. That's really what we're trying to promote. And obviously it's challenging, because people are resource limited, and that's one of the reasons why it's a flexible and adaptable, risk-based, rights preserving framework, in the sense that we're not managing every risk to infinitum.
One of the technique that comes to my mind is agent-based modeling, which the reason I'm able to even talk about that is I just finished a course with at MIT, understanding this whole thing. But so basically what this technique does is simulates the actions, interactions of autonomous agents. So creating agent-based data, so call it agent-based modeling, to foresee emerging behaviors. So it's something to what Carrie said on the chatbot. How do now we keep an eye on the chatbot? That just create an agent to communicate continually with the chatbot, as opposed to just leaving it to the public. And that modeled agent, when starts communicating with the chatbot, can see what problems it can run into, or what are the emergent risks that we can foresee. So that's a technique. I don't have an example or a use case where we've done that, but that's a technique that I know can work.
And Carrie, I'll just point out that I don't know what the unknown risks are But Kamal's example just pointed out something that I think all of the agency people should be thinking about, is just the importance of workforce development as these technologies start to become more widely used. Like she mentioned, she took a course and it kind of alerted her to a particular issue. I think agencies really need to understand the human component of their workforce is going to be critical on the implementation of all of these things. People are going to need to learn new skills, become aware of what the known and unknown risks are, what the problems are in terms of implementation, and then figure out how to mitigate that. So we really, I hope the next administration continues to put a lot of effort into workforce development.
Yeah, it's Section 10 of the Biden Executive Order 14110, is all devoted really to governmental use and really places a good bit of emphasis on building up the human capital that in some ways might seem ironic that we need to have if we enter a world in which we're looking for operational efficiency by substituting or augmenting humans with machine tools, with artificial intelligence tools. But that's a very, very important point, Daryl. We've got just a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to invite each panel member to share any closing thoughts that you might have. We've spent a good chunk of our time focusing on the potential risks and concerns about AI use by federal agencies. And I think that's very important because these tools, if not designed well, if not deployed responsibly, if not overseen and monitored carefully and in an ongoing manner, can create real problems. Of course, much the same can be said of human beings and the status quo too. So maybe I don't know if each of you wants to end on a more optimistic note of reminding us again of the potential for AI, or to share just anything else that you want to make sure that webinar participants hear that we haven't been able to cover in the conversation that we've had so far. So why don't I go in reverse order from how we started and ask Daryl, then Martin, and then Kamal to offer any closing thoughts in the very brief amount of time we have left.
I think the only quick closing comment I would make is just to let people know the AI revolution is going to happen faster than a lot of people anticipate. It's like the revolution's already underway. It's going to accelerate. There are new tools popping up all the time. The capabilities are getting better all the time. And as Kamal pointed out, they're already being embedded in iPhones and in various other products. So it's here. Regardless of how we feel about it, the balance of risk and reward, we're going to have to get used to this new world.
Definitely agree with what Daryl's saying. I mean, this is a tremendous opportunity to probably create the most significant innovation in the way that we perform federal missions, and doing it in a way that retains the and enhances the public trust is the most important mission that we have as we go through adopting this new technology.
Mine would be very simple, Carrie. You can love it or you can hate it. You can't ignore it anymore. It's here. We will end up in the midst of it. So ignoring is not going to work. One last thing that I would ask the agencies to embark on is, even when you are thinking about adopting, start cleaning your data, put data governance in, because you don't want to start with bad data. So data governance is the precursor to good AI, and make that as a priority for the agency.
And the old aphorism, garbage in, garbage out. So make sure your data are clean. Wonderful insights throughout this whole conversation. I want to thank our panel members enormously for their time in joining us today and sharing their expertise with us. And I also want to thank ACUS again for having the wisdom and the vision for, as Kamal says, not ignoring it, and putting a spotlight on this and having these forums. Call your attention to the next one. Pay attention to that coming up. And with that, I want to thank ACUS and thank each of our panel members and thank all of you who've joined in here today in person or who are watching on the ACUS YouTube channel at another time for taking the time to learn about this. We all have to, and it's incumbent upon us as human beings to understand how this new AI revolution might play out. So thank you one and all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.